evening's 6-game slates. Talking about some NBA. Certainly a lot of news pending with John Wall's recent status upgrade. All the guys who are in or out, or potentially both apparently at the moment, for the Toronto Raptors. Lots of news to discuss on Chalky, James Harden, Suns, Chris Paul, how we feel about that. Quite a bit going on, but I have started the show, at least so far as I am aware. Let's see if we have a tweet. We do. Retweeting the aforementioned tweet. Gonna get in here and discuss some NBA basketball. So let us go then, you and I. Find out how we can. Disappointed to see no Boban yet in the early game. Nuggets are playing the Clippers. Doc Rivers has a thing about playing Boban against the Nuggets. I don't know exactly why it is, because it doesn't seem like it's, the best matchup in the history of matchups. But nonetheless, every time those two teams get together and have themselves a party, we tend to get a Boban sighting, and he averages, 18 minutes and 26 fantasy points or something over the last 4 times the Nuggets have met the Clippers. So I was hoping to see some Boban, and thus advised people in the Osmo.com premium Slack channel not that long ago, and my wishes have yet to be fulfilled. So firing up the additional chat menus, loading it all up and putting it all down. Let's do one of them there. Sure, we'll drag that, stick that over there. Log in, will ya? Alright, there we go. There we go. Oh. Alright, so tweet question from California Cool, friend of the show. With Muscala starting, does that help Embiid more playing with Butler, since they have him to help space the floor instead of Joel? Does that help? I don't actually understand your question. So there we go. That's what I get for reading you out loud there. I'm not sure exactly what to take away from your question. I'll read it one more time. Maybe someone can tell me. With Muscala starting, does that help Embiid more playing with Butler, since they have him, which is some sort of dangling participle, to space the floor instead of Joel? Yep, I don't got it. I'm not sure who him refers to, so that's what I get for reading things that I haven't taken the time to check previously. But let's mute those notification tings before people start screaming at me how annoying they are, and just turn down my volume in general. Hopefully the audio should be just fine, as I appear to have that problem licked, so to speak. Move your mic closer. Well, it's right here. I already did. So I don't know if you're telling me as a matter of course, because I frequently forget to do so, but alright, so it appears that we have roughly everything we need. All the monitors are fired up. All my bags are packed. I'm ready to go. Alright, so let's get in and talk about tonight's slate. Let's check at news and see if we got anything. No, that would have made it too easy apparently. So I guess normally, again, we've moved away from talking about every aspect of every game on Live Before Log, but being as there was no show preceding me today, I'm going to touch on everything briefly and then hand it over to your questions. First checking those in the Premium Osmo chat, and then going to those in the YouTube channel, and see if we can make sure we cover all our bases. So alright, so let's talk about the Wizards and Suns. We'll do this first fairly quick. This is the most attractive game environment on the slate, with a massive over-under. John Wall and Markieff were originally questionable for today with illnesses. It came out about 6 hours ago that they were both going to play, and then I think about a half hour ago, John Wall was changed back down into a game time decision with his illness. He presumably has some manner of the pukes, or the poops, or the Anthony Davises, as we call them around here. So be prepared to have a plan to windmill into a significant amount of Bradley Beal and add significant upgrade, and probably actually just a significant amount of Thomas Satoransky. It will be a low ownership. This will be the second time this year that I'll fully advocate Tomas Satoransky, and third or fourth chance for some of you to get lucky who played him really, really in bad situations last time and got lucky against the Hawks in a couple other situations. But here, he would actually be playing point guard, as opposed to all the times in the past people were like, ooh, he's starting, and he was, projecting to play 35 minutes and take 6 shots and all that. At this point, obviously they have dealt the now waived Austin Rivers. So you would be looking at significant time and he'd actually handle the ball and bring it up, and that would actually portend some sort of significant upside for Satoransky. So 4,500 on FanDuel, 4,100 on DK have a Satoransky plan, but obviously most notably the ceiling for Bradley Beal goes off the charts, and he was already in a pretty good spot, and the game now projects to stay a little bit closer without John Wall, and not shocked to catch random 60 burger out of Brad Beal. He would then become pretty clearly, he's pretty close now, especially at the FanDuel price, being my favorite of those high-priced shooting guards, but at this point he would then go clearly in over discounted DeRozan, over Devin Booker, and all the other guys in that shooting guard spot. So have a plan if you're playing one lineup or 20 lineups as of right now for the John Wall is not playing news that we may very possibly see in the near future. That being said, in the event we get John Wall will play and start, is a pretty phenomenal matchup, especially at $8,900 on DraftKings. Really, mostly at $8,900 on DraftKings, because FanDuel, they're charging you $1,500 more, or something that puts him in a much more dicey category of a guy to look at. But in the event that John Wall, they say, he's fine, he's starting. Obviously, there's some uncertainty with he may crap himself on the court, and I don't think we've seen enough of that in the NBA, because Lord knows I've done it down at the local Y when I was stupid enough to think I could play. But John Wall I would have a lot of interest in. He obviously, his ownership would be, doubly reduced, one by the fact that, he's now been game time decision and questionable for much of the last day, and coming off pretty big spot where he was chalky against the Hawks, and that time, figuratively, shit himself, putting up a pretty bad number. Some foul trouble, but even then didn't get you a fantasy point a minute against the Hawks, so that was pretty disappointing on him. So certainly have a plan there. Trevor Ariza going to be fairly chalky. FanDuel is now closing on priced appropriately, although the matchup is still obviously superlative, but just not generally a massive usage guy, so can certainly get there with threes and steals, but the ownership is going to be really up there, so we're at the point where, it's certainly not a requirement to be played. But that being said, against the Suns, I wouldn't try to talk anyone out of any amount of Trevor Ariza exposure, but I would have just as much interest, maybe even a little more so, in tournaments of going to either Jeff Green or even Markieff Morris. Jeff Green's still going to start, I presume, with Otto Porter still out for a little time. He is 52 or 4,800. And for me would profile pretty similarly to Trevor Ariza, maybe a little bit worse, but the ownership differential should more than make up for that. And Markieff has been just awful. Constant foul trouble or blowouts or both, and just hasn't put up a decent score in a while. But he's getting all his time at the 5, which does add a big upside for him. I think they want to play him 26 or 28 minutes, and if they do that at, for example, 4,600 on DraftKings, he certainly still carries a pretty big upside at that number. And, shout out with guys out. You can still throw a bullet at Sammy Decker or one of those guys, but they'd be pretty far down the list for me. But, again, hopefully you get news that John Wall is out. That would make that a little more tolerable with everyone playing up a little bit, and you end up with Satoransky playing more 1, so he's not playing backup 3, and you get more Sam Decker. That would make that a possibility. But would be strange not to have some exposure to the Wizards in this spot at home. Against Phoenix, which is a pretty tasty spot. Let's go ahead and talk about Phoenix. You still have Melton getting the somewhat ceremonial start at the 1 there for this team. Basically, everyone healthy at this point for the Wiz. Great spot for Booker. Again, anyone against the Wizards this year, especially bigs, particularly well advantaged, but Booker obviously going to have to do a fair amount of heavy lifting here, is going to be playing some point guard. Just a fine spot for Devin Booker. As it sits right now, if John Wall plays points per dollar, I would have him almost dead tied with Brad Beal as opposed to which one I preferred. So that would sort of move it into an ownership question for me, checking out the the premium best in the industry ownership projections and Osmo.com. Right now we have Brad Beal on DraftKings sitting at 14%, and we have Devin Booker sitting slightly lower at 10%. So yeah, I would be just about evenly disposed to each of those two guys. John Wall is out. Tomas Satoransky will start in place of John Wall. Wow, here's all the news. Okay, Wall out, Lowry in, Danny Green in. Okay, so there's the news batch we really need. So no John Wall. Yes, Satoransky, Beal. First 1 and 2 guys I want to get large amounts of. Neither of them would quite amount to 100% play, but Saturday, with football going, when people tend to be certainly less attentive to their lineups, you're going to have, this is also an increase your exposure spot without going into my full rank, but the thing that I'm a huge fan of varying the size of your wager, if you will, and playing DFS based on the environment. This is now an environment with a lot of moving parts, which generally favors us in the collective, I will say. And there's going to be some vestigial leftover ownership for Fred VanVleet, for example, who now with Kyle Lowry playing is a far, far less appealing play. Not out of play, because obviously other guys missing on the team, but you have Satoransky, you have Danny Green playing as well. So at that point, I'd be away from Delon Wright. I'd be away from Fred VanVleet. And those guys will hold some extra ownership. People will misplay several of these situations. You will just have guys who are out, not in lineups, and guys who should be advantageously placed in, not in there. Greg Monroe is going to start at center as well. So that's as opposed to Pascal Siakam, who got the last start at center. But again, they're hoping to body up Joel Embiid a little bit there with that news. So finishing up on the Suns a little bit, and then we'll get back to that game. McCall Bridges, fine in play, just tournaments really at this point, but still getting minutes north of 30 pretty significantly. They're still committing to him. They're taking, for Booker, the minutes away from Melton and other guys. So 4,200, 4,300. He's just fine in tournaments. Not a super upside guy, but that price is low enough where he can get on top of that. Though again, I'm trying to place Tomas Satoransky in that point. TJ Warren, I think, has been playing a little over his head. And the price has come up from, the 5s to the 6s to now he's over 7K on FanDuel and closing on it on DraftKings, but still profiles to be an excellent play. They've obviously really committed to his time as well. And matchup versus the Wizards, bad defense adds to your rebounding upside for they're indeed woeful at it. So pretty big endorsement for TJ Warren too. We'll handle some head-to-heads and questions as we get later, but I certainly would not push anyone away from that point. I don't mind DeAndre Ayton in tournaments. This is a supreme setup for him. His minutes have been up and down. Rashawn Holmes has been taking bits of his time. Certainly just tournaments, but between 7 and 7.5 versus a Wizards team that's been really challenged to pull down rebounds, getting 20 and 10 out of him here would not surprise me whatsoever. So certainly if I'm building more than one lineup, I'd have some exposure there. I do slightly prefer him to DeAndre Jordan, which is a question that I've received earlier in the day. And don't sleep on Kelly Oubre, going home, so to speak, to Washington. Revenge, most sweet in a situation in which he is looking to get some. So let's go ahead and move on to our second game of the evening. There's only one 7:30 game. That is Toronto going into Philadelphia. Curious what the line will have moved to now. These guys have been moving around all day, but I'll see if I can in one take tell you who's playing and who isn't playing. Lowry will play. Green will play. Valanciunas is still out. Ibaka is out. Kawhi is out. Okay, I think we got it. So let me check some pricing on a couple of things. I think, and another thing that would make me interested in increasing my exposure to things would be trying to get some Kyle Lowry in my life. He is going to be, I won't throw an exact guess at the number right now, but he is going to be very under-owned for this situation, playing against Philadelphia, which is a matchup I like a lot for Lowry, and more importantly, without Serge Ibaka. Rounding some numbers here, the Raptors have played 31 games, give or take a game, and Kyle Lowry has played 28 of those games, and of those 28 games, he's played 21 with Kawhi Leonard and 7 without Kawhi Leonard, and he's been ape shit nuts in all 7 without Kawhi Leonard, averaging something like, I'm going to guess, 48, 50 fantasy points. And he's been nuts in, one of the 21 games with him, and good in 5 of them, and tolerable in 10, and legit bad in 5 or 6 or whatever the hell I left over there. That being a long, completely approximate way of saying Kyle Lowry has been exceptional without Kawhi Leonard in the lineup. And I have very little reason to expect that to stop here. So certainly anything you can do to get some Kyle Lowry in this spot and what favors to be a close game would be definitely one of the spots I would be jumping up and down on. Frankly, as much as I like to fade the chalk, I don't think enough people will react in time to make it the chalk as it should be. So I would be starting a lot of lineups with Lowry and Brad Beal at this point. They are guys who can bring you in a really significant upside and not necessarily cost you the kind of money of guys like James Harden and Russell Westbrook and other guys who I am obviously a huge fan of today, but certainly are get away fromable. So I am looking at a couple other news things, and we'll get back to you in a minute here. All right, I think that's right. But yeah, I don't think Kyle Lowry is going to engender nearly as much ownership as he should in this situation. So yeah, I would have a pretty good amount of interest in getting some Kyle Lowry in my life. So let's talk about the rest of this game here. Again, Danny Green's going to play. Kyle Lowry is going to play. So Fred VanVleet, especially pumped up to 6K, is not terribly appealing. Delon Wright, who proved yesterday even at an incredibly nominal price with some guaranteed minutes, can disappoint. Pretty much falls out of play here. As you get into the bigs, these guys become more interesting. Greg Monroe is going to get the start. Obviously, they want to put somebody out there against Joel Embiid. So pretty significant fan of getting some Greg Monroe in your tournament lineups. It can go badly a number of places. I really like Joel Embiid. We'll come to that in a minute. But Monroe has a very big upside. They would like him to play 24 minutes in this matchup, and he will, assuming that you don't get an issue with fouls on Embiid, which is a reasonable possibility. But I don't expect the ownership to be that high with the lateness of the news. But again, the bigs here now on Toronto are where you're looking for value, because again, they have no Leonard, they have no Ibaka, they have no Valanciunas. So I don't really want to play Fred VanVleet. I don't really want to play Delon Wright. The bigger, the better. So we're looking at basically OG Anunoby, Norm Powell, who plays down to the 3 at least some of the time, Greg Monroe, and Pascal Siakam. Pascal, my favorite guy here, certainly at Yahoo price and DraftKings price. FanDuel has priced him now somewhat appropriately. Was a bit disappointed yesterday so through a quarter he was terrible and had like 4 fantasy points. And I was sitting in the premium chat trying to scoop up a side bet while Anunoby went out and had, I don't even know, 22 fantasy points in the first quarter, and was sitting there going, I will still take side money that Pascal gets to 35 fantasy points, or I will take side money that Pascal outscores OG Anunoby, who was going out on the best game of his career, and tried a couple times and could not get any takers on either of those bets. And that's a shame, because I would have won them both. Pascal went out, had a very solid second half. Ended up with, I believe, 38 fantasy points. He's really hard for me to get away on those sites. He's just a very, very, very good basketball player and fantasy basketball player. He's my current most improved player award winner. I don't think he's too many spots away from an all-star selection. He's just been incredibly good, and my greatest source of affection for him is how protean and malleable he is as a player, doing whatever is necessary. They need him to start at center, no problem. They need him to bring the ball up, no problem. They need him to play the 4, take on a tough defensive assignment. He's just really, really good and contributes in every way. He can make threes, get steals, get blocks, drop a couple of dimes, score when necessary. Just a big fan of Pascal Siakam. 7,200 on FanDuel. I can get away from it. DraftKings and Yahoo prices pretty close to my first guy in. At this point, I'm starting a lot of lineups going Lowry, Beal, Pascal. Past that, Monroe we already talked about. I have no issue with you playing OG Anunoby. This team is, minus a lot of bigs. And yesterday's game could have been better for him. He missed 3 wide open 3-pointers. And I don't mean like a guy is closing out. I mean, no one was within 11 feet of him and missed some 3-pointers, which is obviously pretty disappointing because he could have put up an absolute monster. Justice Winslow is in. Daniel House is likely to get the start for Chris Paul on Saturday. Brandon Knight will be limited to about 20 minutes on Saturday. Yeah, Brandon Knight does not look good. We'll get to the Rockets in a second, but and I will update our ownership projections. But not as big of a fan as Brandon Knight as apparently a lot of people seem to be. But again, if they're saying we think we're going to give the guy 20 minutes, 20 minutes at the price you're paying for Brandon Knight feels pretty good there. Across the ball, looking at Philadelphia, the order in which I have appeal for these guys would be certainly with this news, Embiid, then Butler, then Simmons as far as their price. You have Embiid with no one who can defend him here. Not that anyone can ever really defend him, but no one who can really get close now on this Toronto team without Valanciunas, without Ibaka. Like, it's going to be sticky. Pascal will get some time there. And if I have some concern with Pascal, it's that Monroe can't handle it, and they just end up throwing him onto Embiid, and he picks up fouls. That would not surprise me at all. Embiid, I like Pascal a lot, but Joel Embiid is a special class of player. His price reduced on both sites for the expected difficult matchup, which really won't be present in the front court. 10.5 on FanDuel, 9,600 on DraftKings. He makes a lot of sense where he would be my favorite of the big three. Jimmy Butler I like a lot in this spot, especially sans Kawhi. The price is low enough, and it's just a price versus ceiling situation there. There's always some concern with having him in there. I wouldn't want to have him in there with Embiid. I seriously doubt multiple of these guys go off, but if I'm not playing Joel Embiid, I'm certainly inclined to get some Jimmy Buttles in my life. I have Simmons, who is already going to be barely third on my list. The price is down, which is nice. The DK price of 8,500, which is nice, especially when you're getting double-double and triple-double bonuses, which he is certainly not indisposed to doing. But at this point, bringing Lowry back in a negative matchup for me, and still just fine to play in tournaments, but would land pretty solidly after those other two. One of the most popular value plays of the day, especially at 3,600 on DraftKings, would be Mike Muscala, sitting at 4,200 on FanDuel. A fine play in both of those because Wilson Chandler is out. Probably I'd have him projected for 30 or 31 minutes. I haven't redone projections, redid since the news came out. But I like plenty of Moose. One of the better value plays today. Let's see with the Toronto news. Certainly like him more than Storm and Norman. Yeah, I like him a lot. Different position on FanDuel than Greg Monroe, and cheaper and $700 cheaper on DK. So there's not a lot of similarity between those two plays. I would probably rather for ownership have Monroe in a lineup than Muscala, but it'd be close, and it'll be interesting to see what Monroe's ownership climbs up to in the limited time here. On a slate this big, I left Landry Shamet and Furkan Korkmaz and TJ McConnell as passable tournament plays. But again, you're reaching a fair bit to get to that. Of those three, I would probably still stick with McConnell the most, just because of the steal upside he carries to the board. Let's go to a somewhat unappealing Milwaukee and Miami game. I don't particularly care for anyone on the Bucks. We have Broggy Pants out. I do not believe we yet have news who will suit up and start for Broggy Pants there. Let me double check and make sure I didn't miss it, but nope. So Malcolm Brogdon will sit. That doesn't do a ton. He isn't the highest usage guy. It probably decreases their defense a little bit, giving you a minor upgrade for a couple of guys on Miami. Minor increase for Middleton, Bledsoe, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and maybe even Brolo. We'll start talking about Brolo. Brolo is a very solid tournament play. A number of ways he can just get going. And he's obviously cheap enough that, sure, 49 on FanDuel, 4,400 on DraftKings. That's a number he can get on top of. He needs to get out, making his threes, make his threes. Don't think he's going to do a lot of damage inside against Hassan Whiteside. And we'll get to him in a second, but he also is basically just tournaments because of how sort of specious and unreliable his minutes will be in a matchup like this one, where he can have issues, Giannis-based issues, or Brolo on the perimeter-based issues. So a little bit disinclined towards Hassan Whiteside, but again, price is down, especially on DK, and carries a massive upside. But Brolo, probably my favorite tournament center in that 4 to 5K range. Giannis has not been good against the Heat, and Winslow is back in, and they do a perfectly adequate job of guarding him. I'm not going to tell anyone not to play Giannis, but it has literally been one of his worst couple matchups in the NBA. It's the Heat and the Warriors. The Spurs isn't great, but there's 2 or 3 teams that do a good job defending him, and they are certainly one of them. They can throw Winslow onto him. They throw James Johnson onto him, who does a perfectly adequate job. They just have enough defensive guys to sort of freeze out the mega ceiling most of the time, and that's part of what you're doing when you play for Giannis or Westbrook or Harden tonight. Part of what you're looking at is sort of your median projection for those guys, where, I would have Giannis at 53 and Westbrook at 57 and James Harden at like 64, and part of what you're paying for is those numbers, but it's also the mega upside of hopefully these guys, all of whom have an 80-point game in the tank, can give it to you, and this would be an unlikely spot for such an occurrence to come out of Giannis, so I am appropriately disinclined. Not a great spot for Bledsoe, not a great spot for Middleton. Both priced a little more advantageously on DK, but with all the other players coming around, there basically would be one of tournament plays for me, and certainly wouldn't want to stack one alongside Giannis. As far as the bench options, I imagine you get Tony Snell making a start here, though it's possibly Sterling Brown or Pat Connaughton or George Hill. Whomever happens to get the start becomes a passable punt play. And again, you would project, it depends on their minutes for each of them. Snell would, check back out pretty early, and then you'd have like Sterling Brown come in, so Hill could play the backup minutes at the 1 behind Bledsoe. But all of them make interesting. I would be most inclined towards Hill if he got the start. Connaughton would be fine. Sterling Brown would be dicey, and Tony Snell, I don't think you ever should play if you can possibly avoid it, for he does not often bring you any kind of upside, though he would obviously be cheap and at least in cash. Not unreasonable. Looking at the Heat, Tyler Johnson on FanDuel, one of my favorite plays of the day. $4,200 makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we still have no Goran Dragic, no Dion Waiters. You end up with Josh Richardson doing a lot of the point guard work, but $4,200 is just too cheap for Tyler Johnson, a guy who should see somewhere close to 30 minutes, and it's droppable on FanDuel. Makes it even nicer. DK of $5,100. I'm probably trying. It actually, that $900 difference in the lack of ability to drop him, and the fact that you're looking at $700 over the floor and $2,100 over the floor. So, it's really more than just $900 more expensive. Would have me pretty strongly disinclined towards him on DK. On FanDuel, if I was building 150 tournament lineups, I would have like 50 Tyler Johnson. On DK, if I was building 150, I would have like 8. And it's a very significant difference in quality there. Josh Richardson makes plenty of sense, at least in tournaments whenever Goran Dragic is out. It just adds in all kinds of upside, and he's already a guy who carries upside because of his ability to make threes, but more importantly, get big quantities of steals and blocks, especially for a guy who plays out on the wing. He's a very good shot-blocking guard. I still like James Johnson as a value play. Wouldn't be surprised to see his minutes. He's been getting that 18 to 20 minutes. That maybe trends up 22, 23 minutes here because he's one of their better guys at guarding Giannis. So I would have some interest in that, certainly at a value, and I don't expect him to be too highly owned. Wade's too cheap on FanDuel if we want to look at that at $4,900. A full take on Hassan Whiteside is there is certainly an upside here, and there's a real floor here. Floor is gets sort of run off the court, has trouble with Whiteside or with Giannis crashing in, or has trouble with Brolo dragging him all around the perimeter. Plus, they never really need a big excuse to get him off the court, so there's a number of ways that can go sideways, although in the last game we did see Hassan Whiteside play a lot of the fourth quarter, even in what was a tough matchup. So for that reason, I'm not horribly disinclined to it, especially on DK 6,600. That is a price-to-move number. Both of the other center power forwards of Adebayo and Olynyk make a lot of sense to me. Both priced a little better on DK, where they're 4,500 and 4,600. FanDuel, they're both power forwards, where they're 5,200 and 5,400. I think they both make great tournament plays. I like Olynyk a little bit more raw points, but I expect him to be a little more highly owned than Adebayo. For both of them, you want Whiteside to have trouble, so I wouldn't try to correlate it that way. But lots of interest in those guys. Going to do a news check, pause, and look at a couple things. Who should you pair with Beal on FanDuel, Daddy? Booker or Harden? I would probably be slightly more inclined towards Booker at this point, but I'm not going to tell anyone not to play James Harden without Chris Paul. Sato over Monroe? That's a good question. I'd go with yes now. How much should we factor in the Miami zone they've been playing lately? It doesn't change a lot for me as far as projections on other guys. It changed the personnel they use a little bit. They're less inclined to it with like Olynyk out there. It's an interesting situation, but I would need to see more to have a better take on it. All right, checking that. Checking some news here to get into. Interesting. Sure, all of that makes sense. Sorry, everybody. Just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. All right. Let us continue on with our tour today. Apologies for 1 minute. Things are always a little more challenging when I'm out here by myself. Makes things a little bit more interesting. Okay. Yeah, that should do it for everybody. Okay. All right, let's continue onward. Yeah, I think we got everybody on Milwaukee and Miami. 3 games to go, so we'll speed up here a little bit. 6:30. So, yeah, James Harden. Okay, so let me give you the first level analysis you'll hear on James Harden. You'll hear it from a lot of people, and it's absolutely true. You take Chris Paul off the court, James Harden becomes, godlike. His usage goes up over 40%. He becomes an absolutely prolific scorer. He still plays a metric ton of minutes. The line in this game is only about 5 points. There's every reason to think that if it stays close, he's going to play 41, 42 minutes, and you should project him for north of 60 fantasy points. And even if this game doesn't stay close, he stays in longer than many of the other studs we're talking about. And all that is well and good and true. Now, this is not the Spurs defense we've seen in the past. Danny Green is gone. Kawhi Leonard is gone. It's much harder for DeMar DeRozan, who's a legit bad defender, and Britton Forbes and Derek White and the other assembled guys to handle James Harden. And so you should load him in as the top overall play on the slate by miles, and he is a beautiful, beautiful person. And apparently Nikola Jokic got ejected from the game on Sunday. Which, why would you do that, Jokic? It's less likely Boban's going to make it in now, and I need him for my season-long teams. Now, here's the next tier of this analysis I want to bring up. For the first, we'll just talk about James Harden in a vacuum. One more useful piece of news here. The Rockets are not on a back-to-back. Normally, that's not a particularly meaningful distinction, but everybody's on the back-to-back. The Bucks, the Spurs, the Raptors, and the Jazz played yesterday. The Wizards, the Suns, the Thunder, the Heat, the Clippers, the Warriors, and the Mavericks play tomorrow. The only 2 teams on the main slate that do not play, either did not play yesterday or do not play tomorrow, are the Rockets and the 76ers. That's it. Every one of the other 10 teams played yesterday or is playing tomorrow, and that's a reasonable distinction, especially when you're talking about all-world players who are going to play 40-plus minutes. So there were 7 very good reasons to play James Harden. Let me talk about the Spurs for a moment. The Spurs defense for a lot of this year was shitty, and people were like, wow, their defense is shitty, and they were right, because their defense was shitty. They have turned a quarter. Over the last 2 weeks, they have played 7 games. None of their opponents have scored 100 points. None. The Jazz the Suns, the Clippers, the Bulls, the 76ers, the Magic, and the Timberwolves have all remained in double digits. The Spurs won 6 of those 7 games, losing only at home to the Bulls. Sort of messes up my whole theory a little bit here, but they look legitimately good. Also, if you look at their margin of victory in the 6 wins, they beat the Jazz by 13. They beat the Suns by 25. They beat the Clippers by 38. They lost to the Bulls. I don't even know. They beat the 76ers by 27. They beat the Magic by 39. And they beat the Timberwolves by 26. They are, put quite simply, fucking shit up right now. That is an incredible run of basketball. And while some of these teams are not great, the Jazz, the Clippers, the 76ers, the Timberwolves are at least teams that have been, above average and occasionally exceptional. They are racking shit up. And again, that's 7 consecutive games in 2018 where, JV high school teams seem like they would score 80 points in the NBA with the rules changes, etc. I will stipulate gently, without going too deep into the details because we're running out of time, that their defense is vastly improved versus earlier this year, and the eye test also confirms that. So I will call the matchup average at this point. Still fine, still good. I don't think all of a sudden this is, the Grizzlies or the Jazz or something. But, okay, so then we'll talk about Popovich and Harden. Gregors there does a pretty good job against James Harden. I will at this point introduce into the conversation Mr. Russell Westbrook. So checking and seeing if our ownership has been updated, which I would not expect it to. It's the weekend. Everyone's busy with the foosball. It has been updated. Look at that's what you get. So we have James Harden currently at 28%. That's a good number. And I think I'd want to have more than that. We have Russell Westbrook at 10%. So we have him at about third the ownership. And I have James Harden projected for a good 10 points higher. And I'm not saying don't play James Harden, but I'm explaining why if I had one lineup, I would probably not play James Harden. Going to be much, much more popular. I would try to play him and Westbrook to have a really unique lineup and with some extra value opening up here. Although I want to play Lowry and Beal. So all those things couldn't concurrently happen. But again, I'm doing this all in my head. Give a guy a break. So since coming to the Houston Rockets, I will ask you, how many times do you think James Harden has scored, we'll say, 70 fantasy points against the San Antonio Spurs? Which I think would be, the number at which we'd be at least happy with what he's putting out tonight and over the other stud options. So regular season and postseason, I'll give you the postseason. How many games has he scored, because they were in the postseason against them 2 years back. How many games has he scored 70 fantasy points? Ready? Answer is 0. It has not happened. Now, I'd give him a good 40% chance of doing it tonight. Everything is in this situation, and as you don't need to point out to me, there's no Danny Green, there's no Kawhi Leonard. This is not your yesteryear Spurs. But the coach does matter, and the system does matter, and these Spurs have been doing better. In those years, they played one postseason series against each other. In those 6 games, Harden scored 27, 41, 52, 58, 59, and 66.5, which is higher than any regular season game. Here are the fantasy point totals since he came to Houston. This is 6 years ago. Okay? 48, 53, 58, 53, 49, 31, 41, 39, 36, 40, 40, 25, 27, 36, 64.5. That's the high regular season one. 60, 57, 62, 50, 55, 44, 39, 45, and 51. The 45 and the 51 coming this year. Now you may say, well, there's no Chris Paul. Oh, that's interesting. Of those, since Chris Paul came to Houston alongside James Harden, Chris Paul sat out one game. It was a game in April of last year. James Harden played 36 minutes and scored 39 fantasy points. You may be saying, oh, what did Russell Westbrook have to do with this? Well, again, James Harden has not scored 70 fantasy points in those. I would have to total them up here. I'm not going to spend the time and count, but I will ballpark that to having been 30 games. James Harden has not scored 70 fantasy points one time against the San Antonio Spurs. Russell Westbrook has scored 73 or more fantasy points, counting the postseason 6 of his last 14 games against the Utah Jazz. In the regular season, now he failed to do it earlier this year with the second worst of his totals. Here's his last, we'll go from January 1st, 2017. In the regular season, here's his regular season totals in order: 80, 75, 80, 37, 76, 56, 63, 45. And then if you want to look at the postseason, this would have been in the playoffs last year. Played 6 games against the Jazz: 58, 59, 43, 44, 76, 73. Now, and again, those many of those came alongside Paul George. So I still have Russell Westbrook projected for more than 10 points less than James Harden. By far the most dominant factor in your calculus and what we're talking about here should be the fact that it is James Harden and at least a reasonable matchup without Chris Paul, and that's super, super exciting. But if you're telling me Harden's going to be triply owned, I would think long and hard about who I would put in my lineup. So there is the ballad of James Harden and Chris Westbrook. Russell Westbrook. Yeah. So that's just a ton of data. And do what you want with it, but hopefully I presented a complete picture of the scenario. Let's talk about the rest of this game. Eric Gordon, the price has obviously come up significantly. At 6K, I still like him a lot in tournaments, and I obviously like him more if you do choose not to play James Harden. There is some negative correlation there, and certainly that's a nice leverage play with Harden being one of the top 3 most owned players on the slate. He's still especially underpriced on FanDuel, where he's 5,900. The splits, he was hurt earlier this year with a foot injury, so the splits without Chris Paul are not as sexy as they should be, but if you include last year and previous, it's still pretty damn exciting, and it's worth pointing out that Eric Gordon was good in both the previous games this year against the Spurs, with Chris Paul playing in both of those games. I think he started one and came off the bench in another one, but in those 2 games, you ended up with him getting 35 to 40 fantasy points in both games, if memory serves. My computer's basically not moving at this point, so we'll be doing the rest of the show from memory. But yeah, that's pretty damn exciting. Looking at the Spurs, I ranked for tournaments and included in my player pool all the cheap guardsy guys, but I never really know what the hell to do there. I think my favorite tonight would be Patty Mills, followed by White. But they all ranked as C's in tournaments, which means feel free to throw one in there, but I don't have a ton of confidence in any of them other guys I would rather look at for value. Daniel House is going to get the start, apparently. I would like Gerald Green more in tournaments. I like him a little bit more with that bench unit. I still think he gets a ton of time. So I would play Gerald Green over Daniel House in tournaments, barely, but they're both perfectly tolerable plays. PJ Tucker's prices come up to the point at which you're asking for a little bit of trouble. I don't think I'm going there tonight. Clint Capella, $9,000 on FanDuel. I'll probably try to find my way up to Joel Embiid, but 7,800 on DK is a nice spot, and I like having some exposure to Clint Capella. Looking at the rest of the Spurs, I don't know what I need this for. The computer's not doing anything. Have a drinking problem. DeMar DeRozan, just a little bit too cheap, kids. 7,700 for double D's is an exceptional number. The 2 games between these 2 teams this year, you had ridiculous blowout in one of them, and they combined to score 180 points in the other one. Neither of which is an impossibility in this situation, by the way. If Houston got absolutely demolished today, I wouldn't be surprised. But Aldridge 79 and 76, DeRozan 82 and 77 are both in positions where you can get an upside, and they both make more sense as a correlation play if you are running James Harden in your lineup. So I prefer DeRozan in this spot by a little bit, but I think they're both definitely in there. I don't have any issue with exposure to Rudy Gay. No really strong takes on this game. Just a whole lot of random data to throw at you about people not even playing in this game. Snell will get the start for the Bucks. I am thoroughly unenthused. I am thoroughly flaccid with the Tony Snell news. Let's go ahead and move on to our 2 remaining games. We have the Mavericks going in to play with the Dubs. Dennis Smith Jr. will not play again. This should most immediately bring our attention to two fine men of foreign nationalities, Luka Doncic and JJ Barea. Both of them now have become priced up a little bit. $4,500 JJ Barea the other day on FanDuel, where it was still, you didn't feel bad about dropping $4,500, made some sense. Still very much in play here, but not an ideal matchup for either of these guys. Luka looked very impressive previously this year. In his matchup with the Warriors, sort of a coming out game for him. I enjoyed that quite a bit. Certainly in play, but I'd rather play DeRozan, I'd rather play Beal, I'd rather play Booker. Like, he comes down a little bit on my list. I still think he's a fine play, believe it or not. So it's one of those things where it's just we have so many basic shooting guards who are priced, in that 8 to 85 range. I have him last of those guys, but I still like him plenty. But we're starting to price out the upside a little bit for him, it feels. But certainly in a matchup with some pace, and removing DSJ makes it perfectly possible. Harrison Barnes is the last piece in, is fine. Wesley Matthews is, I believe, still questionable in the event he is out. Dorian Finney-Smith should get the start there and makes a thoroughly unexciting punt. The best thing I can tell you about Dorian Finney-Smith is he is not Tony Snell. Jalen Brunson, same thing, not seeing a ton of upside there, but again, short slate in tournaments, you can do it. Had 2 upside games previously this year, but difficult to trust the minutes or the production at this point. And DeAndre Jordan has, unlike many other centers, actually been able to hang around on the court against the Golden State Warriors a fair amount. No issue with him in tournaments, though. I would prefer DeAndre Ayton were I to play one of those guys. Looking at the Golden State Warriors, it's a little bit site dependent, but I like having exposure to at least one of these guys in your game. Now, they're at home. There's a blowout risk here. So I have some concern there, but I generally like having a piece of this game, and I think even though everyone's a little underpriced, I generally like the cheaper two a little bit more. I like Clay, who on DK is only 64, and Draymond, who on DK is only 63, but is even better priced on FanDuel, where he's 66, and where his style of play leads to the most egregious upsides of 10 combined steals and blocks, etc., etc. So it ends up being a little site dependent. On DK, my favorite would be Clay. On FanDuel, my favorite would be Draymond Green, trying to get one of these guys in a lineup. And there's a chance this game stays close. This could be a game environment you could stack where you could play one of the 2 small guys and one of the big guys, so Steph and Clay, or Durant and Draymond, and play them alongside, Luka and maybe Harrison Barnes or something. But generally, I like the other games more, and there seem just like guys who are more underpriced in situations that are more advantageous. But if I'm building, 100 plus lineups, I have a couple of game stacks in this sucker. Kevin Durant at 9,200 on DK does feel especially good. Hard to imagine he's going to hurt you too much, and it's still Kevin Durant, so he's carrying a big upside. Steph a little more advantageously priced on FanDuel. My issue at this point is that there's Satoransky, and there's Tyler Johnson, and there's Kyle Lowry. And so even though $9,400 Steph feels pretty good, difficult to get there on first lineup, but I would certainly want to expose myself to Steph if given the opportunity. And then between the bench guys, probably, not the bench guys necessarily, Looney is starting. I would play Looney and Cash and Jerebko in tournaments were I to look at any of the less popular dub-dubs. Let's go ahead and move on to our final game. Thunder and Jazz. Have already spoken well more about Russell Westbrook than probably anyone needed to this evening. There is obviously an upside there. He was dog shit when they played earlier this year, although I've heard this incorrectly reported, which is strange because it was a close game and they only won by like 12 or something. It's like, well, that's not exactly what went down there. The Thunder blew them out. That game was in Oklahoma City, and they ended up winning by 9 or 10 points, I think it was, but that was with Utah outscoring Oklahoma City like 40-20 in the fourth quarter to make that game closer than it would have been. It was still a bad game for Russell Westbrook, who put up one of his shit triple-doubles. That was a 12, 11, 10, only 45 DK points. Disappointing, but 4 of 18 from the field. Obviously, that can get better, but it is worth taking into consideration that at various times this year, this Thunder defense has been one of the best defenses in the NBA. We're talking about Westbrook, so it's worth pointing out that the Jazz are a very solid defense. Regarding the Thunder defense, it does cause me to be a little more concerned. Talking about some of these Jazz players, they are at home, which we like. They're a little more acclimated to the altitude. Yeah, I like Ricky Rubio any day where he's going to be like 5,400, 5,900. He finally made some shots yesterday. He was great. I was big on him the day before yesterday where he had plenty of peripherals but shot 0 of 8 from the field. And that's basically what you're dealing with here. I do like the matchup with the Thunder as being at least solidly average for him. And he's 5,400 on DK. That is a price which is low enough. I certainly think you can try to take advantage. I don't think it's that much of a point chase. And again, there are certainly some other examples to look at here. Not a great spot for Donovan Mitchell, but cheap enough you can run him out there in a tournament, but I don't expect anything great. I like Joe Ingles against Paul George just because he talks trash and that's fun to watch. And his price is still down in the 5, so it makes sense in a tournament, something you can do. Don't really like Gobert or Steven Adams against each other. They do tend to limit each other's upside pretty significantly. They just chop the rebounds, play decent defense on each other, and the production tends to come from other places. And I realize I didn't specifically mention Paul George. The price is up for him because he's been exceptional. But again, this is not a tremendous matchup for anyone. And if I think it leans slightly towards Westbrook, that would make me think it leans slightly away from Paul George. So certainly would not disincentivize anyone or try to talk anyone out of playing Paul George in a lineup. But you're paying a lot in the... the matchup is not as pretty as it could be. So would certainly have some concern there. Let's look at a couple other things real quick. Yeah, that all makes sense. Okay. So we'll handle some questions because I believe all pending issues have been addressed. So let's handle some questions. Looking first at the premium Slack. Middleton and Harden or DeMar and Embiid for DK cash. Cash, I'd have to go Middleton and Harden. Fading Harden and cash seems a recipe for disaster. Warren, Middleton, or Green. I would play probably Green over Warren over Middleton in tournaments. In cash, I would probably play TJ Warren. Is the Dallas game a potential blowout? Yes. Best DK play under 8K. Just like best play, the play I like the most that costs less than $8,000 on DK is probably Kyle Lowry. Is there going to be another ownership update? I don't know. Minutes projection for Monroe, I missed it. I'm going to go with 24. That's what they want. I'll actually go with they want him to play 24. I'll say 21 because you have to amortize in some foul trouble. Favorite 4,600 or under players on DraftKings. Top of my head, Satoransky is certainly going to make that list. Muscala is 3,800, but projects to be pretty sexy at that number. Don't mind Bam Adebayo. Really don't mind Markieff Morris in tournaments at 4,600. You could play PJ Tucker. I like Kelly Olynyk a lot. So of those guys who I like the most, Kelly Oubre too. So Wizards, former Wizards abound. I will say for tournaments, I will slightly rank them Oubre, Markieff for the environment, and then Olynyk, and then Adebayo. But I like all those guys in tournaments. Certainly some risk with several of them, but they all do carry a significant upside. Never mind. Favorite 4K or under player on DK not named musicals, which I have a feeling was supposed to be Muscala. Shout out autocorrect. Monroe's a touch over that. No Delon Wright anymore. Don't really want to play Melton. Don't like Holmes. He's not playing. Not that thrilled with Decker. You're reaching deep. You are reaching deep. Other than Mike Muscala, players under 4K on DraftKings that I like. Sato is 41. So I'm going to give you James Johnson, but there's no one I absolutely love here. Other options would be Kevon Looney, TJ McConnell, Looney being the more cashy of those options, Jalen Brunson, Melton, Rashawn Holmes. But definitely under 4K once you exclude Muscala from the possibilities. I am searching. Ariza and Thompson or Monroe and Lowry in cash. I'll go Monroe and Lowry. Feels... Any fear Raptors may not give Lowry full minutes? Yes, I have some fear they will try to limit his minutes. But I think he has a thigh contusion, which is sort of one of those I'm warmed up, I should be okay. And again, they're on the back end of the back-to-back, and he didn't play yesterday. So Sure, it's obviously a concern, but I think the likelihood is that he gets all the minutes he needs. But perfectly reasonable question. OG is still 3.5 on DK. Yeah, OG is just not a very good fantasy basketball player, and now that we're starting Monroe again, he's back up at the wing where I like him less as opposed to spending more time down at the really nominal 4. I'm fine with OG Anunoby. He is cheap as hell, and this is a team that needs him to play minutes, but his upside tends to be a little difficult to come by. So I'm not going to talk anyone out of playing him. I would probably rather play Norm Powell at a 10th of the ownership in my first lineup. But again, he's well worse with Lowry and Danny Green back in there. So I really don't want to play either of those guys, but he's getting the start. Lowry or DeMar DeRozan on DraftKings? I would play Lowry at this point. Awesomo's rankings are fucked up. If by fucked up you mean amazing. FanDuel Cash, Westbrook and Booker or Lowry and Harden? Lowry and Harden, not close. Yeah, the Cash don't get, cute. Westbrook is a tournament pivot off James Harden, nothing else. Let's go over to the YouTube chat for the first time today. Hold on, scrolling through 4,000 messages I've missed. You crazy bastards. Let's power some of these out real quick. All right, made it to the bottom of the list. Eric Gordon, Anunoby, and Lowry, or Ayton, Mike Muscala, and Rudy Gay. I would probably play Gordon, Anunoby, and Lowry. I just want to get as much Lowry as I can. Ted, you're claiming 80 from Harden tonight. He's never had 70 in his career versus San Antonio. How about those stats? Yeah, but I still wouldn't be surprised to see 80 out of him tonight. Like, game log watching is fine. And I think it's important to note that this Spurs team appears to be not as wretched defensively as it has been for the majority of the year. But 80 out of Harden tonight wouldn't surprise me remotely, and I tried to make sure that I tempered my analysis to indicate that case. Monroe, Muscala, or Winslow? I'm not a big fan of Winslow in this situation. He's been generally shit against the Bucks in the past, and that isn't surprising. I would say Muscala and Cash and Monroe in tournaments make sense. Siakam, Monroe, or Muscala, Ayton? I'm going to play Siakam, Monroe, but that's very, very close for me. I'm just a huge Pascal fan. Rubio or Schroeder? Yeah, those are both fine options. I will generally go with Rubio. Sorry for not giving Dennis Schroeder a shout-out. Returned from his suspension for being a naughty boy. But I will slightly go with Rubio in that case. But very close. James Johnson and Aldridge? Sure. Monroe or Muscala? Again, I think Muscala is a better cash play and Monroe is a better tournament play. Would like to point out at this point that no matter what happens with James Harden, there's right and there's wrong, and then there's what happened. So try not to be too results oriented, because I'm looking at 60 people screaming at me and each other that you're an idiot for thinking of not playing James Harden, and others saying concurrently that fading James Harden was the easiest decision they made all day. However it happens to turn out today, this is not any indication that one of you is correct and one of you is incorrect or anything remotely like that, and just keep that in mind. Let's go back to the premium chat, see if we missed anything. OG or Jerebko in a DK GPP? I would play Jerebko. Jeremy Grant or Josh Jackson FanDuel GPP? I would play Jeremy Grant there. Josh Jackson is just again, I try to avoid doing Guy, and that team is coming full now, and Oubre's there. I don't think helps him, and so on and so forth. You think Sato and Beal are good for cash? Sato and Beal are good for cash. Tis true, tis true, tis true. Coming up, we're under a minute to lock here, my friends. We'll do a little bit of daddy-like after we get started. Nice that we got all that news, and again, up to your personal taste, but I would try to, make yourself comfortable with the theory that you do occasionally have to change your level of exposure, even in tournaments. So, all right, we are coming down to it. And we are there. All right. Let us make sure we are logged in. I will spend a couple minutes and talk about ownership here, and then I will retire to my palatial estate, but still handle some questions in the premium Slack chat for a little while for later slates and things of that nature before heading out to play basketball myself. And hopefully not embarrass myself too much at my advanced age. All right, let us see. Before anything else, hold on, I gotta see. Did they ever actually put Boban in? That's all I'm really concerned about here. No. Damn it, Doc. You let me down, Doc. You let me down. All right, let's look at some ownership in the largest DK contest. Just apparently the $200,000 pull-up jumper. It's like a good contract. It's like Jabari Parker, who basically got paid about $200,000 per pull-up jumper. Satoransky, 42% on DK at this first lineup I happen to be looking at. That's good. Beal, 36. That feels pretty exceptional. I'd want to have a lot of that. Ariza, 56. Jesus, people. It's called a small sample size. Like, I like Ariza as much as the next guy, but... And I actually like Ariza more than the next guy. If you've been following my shows for the duration of the year, there's about 5 times over the first month and a half before everyone remembered he existed where I was talking about Trevor Ariza, and frequently other people were like, why would I play him? He's Trevor Ariza. And so, yeah, I'm a big Trevor Ariza fan, but 56%. Have you watched Trevor Ariza play basketball? He can be sort of a black hole. So our ownership's 56% Trevor Ariza, 42% Tomas Satoransky, 36% Bradley Beal, 23% Devin Booker, 16% Kelly Oubre, 15% DeAndre Ayton, 13% Jeff Green, 11% Markieff, that's what we like to see, 9% TJ Warren, that feels very, very good. 6.5% Thomas Bryant, 3.5% John Wall. Congratulations, you played yourself. And again, that would have been 1% on a Friday. But again, people playing basketball, that news came out quite some time ago. And so those guys were nice enough to pay a quarter of the rake for you. So let's all say thank you to them in mind and in spirit for making this easier for us this evening. That is it. I am done. I will likely be back tomorrow, probably at 5 o'clock. There is an unusually hearty NBA schedule for a Sunday going tomorrow. It will be my last show for at least a little while. I am traveling to Mexico from Christmas until New Year's Day. I'm going to bring with me all sorts of broadcasting stuff and spare keyboards and mice and mouse pads and everything I can to actually get a decent connection. So I will do between 0 and 2 shows that week from the balcony while lubricating myself. And by that I mean drinking, of course. Hopefully. So we will see how that goes. Again, if I can do a good job and host a decent show, I shall do so. If I cannot, then I will not. And with that, thank you all for sharing part of your day with me. Best of luck in your contests, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Good luck with the foosball.